Hello and welcome to our podcast all around kickstarting your marketing in a post-pandemic world. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Pete Whitmarsh, who is our head of paid media at Search Laboratory. Also by Rob Marsden, who is head of digital owned and earned. And also Jimmy McCann, who is head of digital strategy. So we've got a crack team ready to answer every question that I can put to them all around this period that we're in, which is, as everybody says, unprecedented. So I'll kick things off straight away with a question all around how do you know when to ramp up digital marketing again? I'll start with you, Jimmy, because you're kind of working with clients on strategy at the moment, and it's ever-changing times. So, what's your take on this? When do we start up digital marketing again? Should we be marketing right now? What's the story?
Yeah, I suppose you know, in order to see you know, the green shoots appear, I suppose you've got to monitor the demand, and the best way to monitor demand is via what people are searching for. We can use Search Console as an excellent tool. If you haven't got your paid search on at the moment, you won't know when those spikes are coming in impressions. So Search Console is your best bet. Make sure that is set up and you're monitoring that. And then the best way to monitor, whether your demand is going up or not is if you are you might have seasonality playing a part. You might have days of the week. So various immediate spikes in impressions might be sort of false positives. So it's a good idea to connect this impression data to Data Studio, and you can do various calculations within that dashboarding tool that will enable you to sort of spot a trend. So you could create a calculation, for example, that is your average daily impressions over the last 3 days, 7 days, 21 days, and then you can map those trends against one another to actually see whether you're seeing the last 3 days or the last 7 days are higher than the average in the 7 days previous, but also year on year, what does that look like? So yeah, I would definitely recommend some sort of monitoring of that. Another consideration that somebody might have is that if you're not appearing for an awful lot of generic searches, that might not indicate that the demand is there. But I would say that even the little amount of generic, but also the branded search should show the improvement, the trend anyway. So I would use that.
Okay. So basically, look at the stats and make sure you don't over respond to any sort of seasonality that spikes that sort of are in the underlying data anyway. So Pete, from a paid perspective, ramping up marketing again, how do you know when to start spending? Jimmy said that you look for the increase in search traffic. What about from a paid perspective?
Yeah, well, I think with paid, given that a lot of it is going to be return on investment focused, you need to be really monitoring things like your conversion rates and the cost of the media as well. So right now we're seeing cost per clicks across Google far cheaper than usual. We're seeing particularly display and paid social is way cheaper than usual, as much as 50% down on typical costs. So you might not need that same conversion rate that you've historically needed in order to actually be generating some level of profit from your campaigns. So I would say make sure you are doing something, if that's monitoring the conversion rate from your organic or direct traffic, or perhaps just running a small scale paid campaign on some of the sort of top performing keywords that you've historically had, just really to allow you to monitor and keep seeing what data is coming through. And really, even in a period like this where the demand might be much lower, there's nothing wrong with really scaling back on those campaigns, but still just keeping them active at a lower level that will still generate some degree of profit. From there, I'd really say the sort of ramp up starts as impressions increase, as the sort of volume starts coming through. You want to make sure that your budget is available for that, and that you're not going to start getting capped out by not having enough budget. So yeah, make sure the budget's available as soon as that ramp up starts, and you want to really get that kind of first mover advantage over your competitors, really, so that you can take advantage of the sort of cheaper media, and as soon as the demand starts coming back.
So click costs are cheaper, so demand is down, but the fact that click costs are cheaper suggests that just lots of people have dropped out of the market, or indeed conversion rates have dropped as well. I mean, what are you seeing with different clients? Have conversion rates dropped massively?
Yeah, I mean, it hugely varies from industry to industry as well, of course, where, in something like travel right now, conversion rates are absolutely off a cliff. They're pretty much 0% for some of our travel clients.
But there's still some search volume.
There is still some search volume. Yeah, I think travel's an interesting one there, where people still want to dream. They still want to kind of think about what they're going to do when they exit this period. So there's still absolutely a decent amount of search volume, but the conversion rates are really quite low, to be honest. So yeah, it's going to be quite hard to run a campaign for a travel company which is going to generate any degree of profit right now. Whereas, say, for something like retail, if it's something like fashion, for example, where we have seen search volumes drop off there, maybe by about 20-25%. I suppose there is a number of retailers who have also dropped their media spend, or kind of pulled back on budgets, or maybe paused entirely. So that has led to the sort of cheaper media costs as well. So conversion rates can be down for some of those industries, but ultimately, so long as that conversion rate balances with the media cost in order to generate some degree of profit, then it's still worth advertising on.
Yeah. Okay. So paid is very obviously very immediate. What about your owned and earned campaigns? So your SEO campaigns, for example, Rob. What are you finding? People stopping and then ramping up again afterwards? What's the plan on that front?
Yeah, I suppose there's, I oversee earned and owned media, and that includes SEO, social media management, digital PR, and events. And as you'd expect, there are quite big differences across all of those. In terms of SEO, it's always been sort of building for the future. The work that you do today could have a short-term positive impact, but in many cases, you start to see the fruits of your labor at some point in the future. So that's been very much about making sure that our clients are in the best possible position organically to drive traffic as that demand does start to increase. And to echo what Jimmy said, search trends have always given us a great insight into consumer trends, and now's a really important time to sort of monitor that. And we've seen from Google and from Microsoft, they're putting out a lot of data in terms of what the search trends are looking like. Google released a rising retail categories tool, and I was just looking at that this morning. And over the past week, 8 out of the top 10 sort of rising categories in the UK are sports related, which is of course tied back to the fact that you can get out and start playing some sports again. So being on top of that demand, I think, is really important, and that will guide you in terms of when you really need to ramp back up. But from an SEO perspective, it's very much been about making sure that you're in the right position to make the best of that traffic as the demand does start to build. But then, that's a very different picture across the sort of other areas that I oversee. So events, for example, that's been massively impacted. But what we are doing is we're running more virtual events for clients as well, and I think in the future some of that stuff will stick. So yeah, I think it's important to really kind of understand the kind of consumer trends on the PR front. You talk about sort of the earned and owned campaigns. the media has just been dominated, as you would expect, over the last couple of months with sort of stories about the pandemic. But we have seen waves throughout that of some sort of demand for positive stories as well. So it's just really important to keep on top of that and then make sure that your campaigns reflect what the sort of consumer sentiment is. We're going to be liaising with our contacts in the media to see what kind of stories they're looking for and monitoring journal requests and things like that as well. And then I suppose from a social media perspective, again, it's kind of monitoring and listening to what the consumer sentiment is and what the tone is more generally. So monitor engagement levels, for different type of posts to see what people are responding to, and again, when you are ramping up campaigns, just sort of remember that a lot of people have been negatively impacted from this, both financially and emotionally. So as a business, you might be ready to sort of crack on and move forward, but it is important as well to think about your customer and kind of do the right thing by them. But yeah, it's very much sort of led by data across all of those different elements of earned and owned media.
And might it be an opportunity? I'm thinking specifically SEO wise, to steal a march on your competitors, or I don't know. I'm just thinking a lot of people will pull budgets in this period, and given that SEO is something for the future, it could be a time to steal a march.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing with SEO is that it's all about momentum, and what you don't want to do is lose momentum. If you pull back on activity during the kind of quieter periods, because you are kind of always building for the future, you can lose momentum, especially if your competitors are still sort of actively optimizing and doing that work and building their future as well. So yeah, we would always recommend that activity continues, because that will see you right as things start to ramp back up. Like I say, you need to be in the best possible position to sort of capitalize on that increased search volume.
Okay, so I suppose across the board, it's all about looking for the trends in the data that tell you what you should do. So you should be all over your data. So I suppose going to the ramp up then, maybe I'll start with you, Pete. What the ramp up looks like? What do you do? You see the green shoots. What do you turn everything back on? How do you manage that process?
Yeah, well, I think you need to definitely approach it with a degree of caution, and really consider the fact that this is a new period. People aren't just going to behave exactly the same as they did prior to this. It's not just going to go from nothing to something in a day. It's very much going to be a sort of gradual ramp up. So yeah, you need to think about what the strategy is during that period. In particular, when it comes to the paid side of things, really think about things like your advertising messaging or banner ads, video ads, that kind of thing. People, again, depending on the industry, people are going to be looking for certain reassurances. If you are, say, in the travel sector, people will probably want to know that there's a lot of flexibility around cancellation policies and sort of rebooking. I think I saw something earlier this week from Qatar Airways where they've offered this super flexible policy to try and encourage people to book, and you can kind of change your ticket for any other ticket for no additional cost, and get credit back for any cancellations that you decide to make. So I think there's going to be an element of really, I guess, not just thinking about what your advertising message is, but thinking more broadly about what your business message is and what is the message that you want to put out there to the world in terms of how you are now operating as a business. So yeah, it might be additional promotions. It could just be certain reassurances or, more flexible returns policies if you're a retailer or something like that. So yeah, all sorts of things like that I think really need to be considered. When it comes to the actual sort of managing of the advertising, you do want to consider things as well, like the fact if you've been switched off for some time and then say you're suddenly relaunching and you've got a automated bid strategy running through Google Ads or through Search Ads 360 or something like that, you will sort of potentially re-enter a learning period, which is where the system is trying to understand a little bit more about how your media operates and how your conversion rates are at the moment and everything like that. So it might take a little while to kind of get through that learning period and make sure you're kind of fully ramped up and kind of performing as you would typically expect to. So that's definitely something to sort of keep mindful of. I guess the other thing I'd say is try not to be too experimental. It might be tempting to kind of think, right, let's go and do all those things we've ever dreamed of from a marketing point of view. But actually, I think this is a time to actually play it fairly safe and really think about what are the campaigns that have historically proven themselves to work well for us. What are the approaches, the methodologies, the kind of audiences that we go for, the keywords that we go for, which of those are the ones that we know work well for us. So that will allow you to really benchmark how you're performing now compared to prior to this period. So yeah, if you're sticking with those safe tactics, you've got a real close benchmark to what you've done before, and then you can kind of ramp those up and down as needed, really. So yeah, I would say, I wouldn't want to completely discourage any kind of innovation, but ultimately I think it is a time to sort of play it safe to some degree and really just go with what works historically.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I suppose, are getting excited about some new world that's going to emerge out of all of this. And what I've heard a lot of people speak on the fact that actually most things will be normal. So don't go too mad. So I'll throw the same thing at you, Jimmy, which is turning everything back on straight away. I wonder if there's also the people who are making an awful lot of money at this point as well. I know certain toy companies and adult sites, and there's different markets that are making an absolute killing. And I suppose just a nod to them to how do they know when where their boundaries are as well.
I mean, off the top of my head, it's a case of make hay where the sun shines if you can. If I know that from experience, there's a number of businesses where there's lots of demand there, but they can't fulfill it. It's like, think about what conversions are you offering. Make sure you're offering a notify me when it's back in stock conversion, or so don't completely switch things off if you've got fulfillment issues. If there's be careful with your shopping campaigns. I've seen an awful lot of shopping campaigns that are pointing me to stock that's out of stock. Wasted spend unpaid in this time is probably the biggest thing to make sure you're on top of.
And I suppose that just going on to now returning to normal, and this is a big debate, what normal then is. Will everything return to the status quo? And even the premise of this podcast, it's what is post-pandemic, or are we in the new normal? Have you got any thoughts on that, Rob?
Yeah, this phrase "new normal" has been sort of bandied around a lot, and in some ways, I think it is to it's right to label it like that. I think consumer trends, we've seen examples of that changing throughout the pandemic. You've seen a lot more wholesalers selling directly to the consumer. People through necessity are finding new suppliers. They're trying new suppliers that they may not have considered in the past. People are used to doing things virtually that could alter buying habits in the future. Things like virtual property viewings, and I know myself, I've been on virtual whiskey tastings and all that kind of stuff. And actually, I think these things will kind of become the norm. Fundamentally, though, I think the fundamentals of digital marketing are, they're going to remain the same. It's still all about identifying your audience, finding them online, and making sure that ultimately your message resonates with them. But I think we do have to be aware that what happens post-pandemic could look different to what happens pre-pandemic. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, keeping on top of consumer trends and consumer sentiment and responding to that and understanding buying habits, I think will kind of set everyone up well in the future from a digital point of view. So I don't think the fundamentals are going to change, but I think buying habits could, and we need to adapt based on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of those retailers that are, or those wholesalers that are selling direct probably didn't, for fear of upsetting their retailers in the past, and needs must at the moment. And I doubt they'll go back.
I agree.
They've got a taste for it now. So there's more people in the market.
I think, just to chip in on that, I think just one thing that we've noticed as well is certainly a number of retailers with bricks and mortar stores which are closed at the moment. There's been a increased emphasis on the online side of things, which I think will absolutely sustain through this. I think both from the sort of business mentality point of view, kind of having that increased awareness of what the digital channels are doing, but then also from the consumer demand point of view as well, that people who, maybe certain demographics who don't typically shop online that much have kind of been forced to shop a bit more online. Certainly with things like supermarket deliveries and stuff like that, it's, that is now pretty much reserved for the elderly and more vulnerable customers who maybe wouldn't have been the typical demographic to shop online previously. So I think it'll be really interesting to see, once the brick and mortar stores reopen, will there still be that increased demand on the digital side of things, and will it actually force a lot of businesses to really kind of focus more on the digital side of things, which, certainly for us in this industry could be a very positive thing. And I think for a lot of people working within the digital space will kind of help to increase the emphasis of what they do, really.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens on the high street after all of this, and whether it does return. And Jimmy, any further thoughts on what status quo looks like going forward, whether we're in it?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because, like Pete said, it could be quite different going forward. But I suppose once the demand, the demand starts increasing in terms of people search volumes, the confidence to convert might still not be as great as it was before. So it's thinking about, what content, or what are people's thoughts and considerations of your audience are, and giving them the things that they want, and potentially a conversion that isn't the end conversion. It's getting them into your marketing funnel, and potentially nurturing them along, rather than, they might be looking for that earlier sale. So it could be more engagement led to start with, and looking at that as a conversion instead of the end goal of a purchase.
So how do you keep all those channels working as one when they need different tactics? I mean, what's the how do you balance all your channels?
It's doing your research. You've got to know your audience. You've got to understand how they're behaving. There's lots of free market analysis tools and paid tools that offer you a little bit of a trial of what they can show you. Get all your data and understand how people are behaving from your analytics data, and there's other digital media. I'm thinking Google surveys. You could survey customers and try to understand what their wants and needs are in this new world, and get some qualitative information that way, and help that drive what you're going to do going forward.
Okay. So I suppose we sort of move on to keeping busy during this period. So we're sort of thinking this ramp up's going to come. What should people be doing right now? And Rob, I'll come to you first of all. So, what are the smart people doing right now? in preparation?
Yeah, I think we've probably covered some of it. I think it's letting the data lead what tactics you actually employ, and we know that there are going to be differences across the different channels, but ultimately thinking about the user, thinking about their needs and wants and responding to that, I think is the thing that we need to do. And you say, what are the smart people doing? Well, I think those are kind of looking to the future, but understanding that it is going to look a little bit different, and making sure that at the center of all of that, they're putting the user first, because if you do that, then the right answer will generally present itself. But yeah, kind of measuring things like engagement, like Jimmy said earlier, thinking about the full funnel, not just thinking about that end sort of bottom of the funnel conversion goal, making sure that you can kind of take the customer on a journey through the full funnel and that you're visible across all those stages of the funnel, I think is the most important thing for me right now.
Okay, and Pete, I mean that kind of thought of, I hear a lot of marketers saying that right now you have to get your awareness going, your programmatic. And I heard a stat from Kantar saying that companies that market through a recession like this had come out 28% higher than those that don't. But it always seems to come from marketing companies that, this kind of stat. What's your view on what people should be doing paid right now? Even if the conversion rates on say paid search don't support big budgets.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen exactly the same study. I've seen a number of studies. I know there's been some stuff that Google have shared with us, which kind of proves a similar thing. I would say that, whilst those studies do come out of marketing companies and are things that are regularly reproduced by the likes of Google, I would trust that. I do think they are conducted with a solid methodology in which they genuinely should prove kind of what the impact would be. So yeah, everything does seem to suggest that keeping your marketing going through a period like this is absolutely the thing to make sure that you come out of the other side of it and still have a great market presence, market awareness and everything like that. As I mentioned as well, media is very, very cheap right now. So if you do want to do, so long as your budgets aren't completely constrained to the point where you can't spend anything, it is a great time to be doing some kind of awareness activity as well. So to make sure that when we exit this, people, even if they've not bought from you during this period, people have become aware of you, and then when they're in the mood to buy your product in the future, you will be a name that comes into their head. So yeah, I actually think it's a fantastic time to be doing some kind of awareness activity. Taking advantage of those cheap CPMs across display networks, across YouTube, Facebook, and the likes. Media is a lot cheaper than it typically is, so it's a really, really good time to do that. And I suppose the one thing I'd mention is when you're doing awareness activity, it isn't just doing it for the sake of doing it. You do still want some kind of measurement. So similar to what Jimmy's been saying, kind of introducing some different conversion goals, whether that's a softer conversion goal of people just engaging with the website, or a uptick in search volume, or even just sort of looking at your click-through rates on adverts and stuff like that. If it's pure awareness, there's still a lot of good ways to measure that and to ensure that we're actually kind of getting some value for the money and showing to the right audiences and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. And Jimmy, there's I know we've put a dashboard together that people can download for free. What does that do, and how does that help you in this phase?
It's more for inspiration, really, in terms of this is the level of detail information that you can get. I would recommend looking through prior months to and years potentially of how people behaved on your website and what a good user looked like. What were the key pages that they viewed, or what is the definition of an engagement? once you have that definition of an engagement, whether that's actually a form submission or like a length of time on site or a key page view, you can create that goal and then measure it. So in that dashboard, I've actually used a segment from Google Analytics and combined it and imported that through into the dashboard to measure that goal. But yeah, it's more of a starting point as an inspiration to then people to use it and elaborate on and see how people engaging, what channels are coming through, what landing pages are the most leading to the most engaged users, and like Pete said, if you're doing any paid activities, then that's something, a hard and fast number that you could go back to your superiors with and say, this is doing a good job. It's driving relevant audience at this key time. So when buyer confidence returns, we hopefully will reap the rewards in terms of people recognizing the brand and coming back to purchase.
Okay, nice one. We've probably run out of time there, but I suppose I've learned a lot around the period that we're in right now. I think the summary was that it's all about looking at the numbers. It's all about looking at what the data's showing you right now, both on your website and using tools like Search Console data and Google Trends. I think a big thing as well is that media is cheap right now. The studies are saying now's the time to be marketing because you do better out of the other end of this. You could potentially steal a march on SEO depending on whether your competitors have ramped down at this period. Watch social because it's different right now. People are talking about different things and responding in different ways. And I think the underlying thing is look at the data, to keep looking at the data, look at your conversion rates, look at the search volumes and respond. Don't do anything too outlandish. People are the same. They want the same things. They might want to buy them in slightly different ways. We do have a white paper that we'll provide a link for that covers all of these topics and more. So please go and download that from our website. But all that remains to say is thanks, Pete, Rob, and Jimmy, and thank you for joining us on this podcast.